Hello there and welcome. It's Digital Foundry Direct Weekly 193. It is the day after the Game Awards 2024. Yes, we're on GEOFFCON 1 here with all of our coverage of the Game Awards. More specifically, we're going to be focusing on the games that caught our eye. And joining me to talk about it, hello, Oliver Mackenzie.
Yes, Rich. Like you said, we've reached GEOFFCON 1. And I actually think it was a great show this year. So lots to talk about today,
Really?
for sure. Yeah, I thought it was great.
Okay, and John Lindemann, hi.
Hey guys, I spent my GEOFFCON 1 doing a CRT yoke adjustment last night.
Really?
Good times. Yeah. Reaching your hand in there, moving the yoke around, playing with the rings. It's a great way to spend an evening, let me tell you.
It sounds like it.
It's like like dodging the lasers at the end of a Resident Evil movie or game. Got to watch out for that high voltage wire.
This has gone off on a tangent very, very quickly. It's usually about an hour into the show, but we're just going there straight away. Anyway, yes, the Game Awards, but before we talk about them, store.digitalfoundry.net, the home of our merchandising wares. Please do check that out. But with that, let's move on to our coverage of the Game Awards. Okay, so where do we begin? I guess we begin with the biggest game reveal of the night, arguably, because there were a couple. The Witcher 4 was revealed on, well, how can we describe it? A cinematic trailer reveal running, or rather pre-rendered, on an unannounced NVIDIA RTX GeForce GPU. Fascinating to see that one unfold. Obviously, the visuals are out of this world, as you would expect from CD Projekt Red and indeed pre-rendered video. John, what do you think about this reaction?
Yeah, I mean, it looks phenomenal. Although I think, as you kind of joked earlier, like the idea that it's pre-rendered, it kind of makes the graphics card of choice irrelevant. Anything could have pre-rendered this out.
Unless there's like a memory thing that requires. I mean, let's assume it's the RTX 5090, right? And let's assume it's got 32 gigs of memory in it, and this cinematic needed that 32 gigs of memory to pre-render it. But let's assume it didn't require 32 gigs of RAM. You could have pre-rendered it on any other GPU. It would have just taken much longer.
Exactly.
So, there's not any real-time element to this. So that was kind of interesting. I guess it's a nice sort of tease for whatever's going to happen at CES 2025. But slightly unnecessary, possibly. But even so, let's focus on the content.
Sure. And I think what's interesting about this is so CD Projekt Red has been through two very big reveals with The Witcher 3 and Cyberpunk, right? That's when they were really on the map. And in both cases, the initial reveal kind of shot beyond what they were able to deliver, one would argue.
Yes. Specifically
with The Witcher 3, I would say Cyberpunk kind of got better in a way, especially once they added full ray tracing to the mix.
Yeah.
But so what we're seeing here, obviously, is the first look at The Witcher 4. And there's going to be some questions, I guess, as to whether this can be achieved in the final game or not. Obviously, it's still very early. Is this even going to be a current generation game? Like, given the timescales, this could very well be something we're looking at for the next generation of consoles at this rate. We don't know yet. But what's here is, it's exceptionally well done. And it does, show off the strengths both of CD Projekt Red's art direction chops, as well as, I guess, Unreal Engine 5's capabilities, right? Everything is just beautifully lit and rendered in a way that it may as well be a CG trailer. And it is pre-rendered, of course, as it notes, but you can tell that there are elements here that are quite feasible in real time, but the fidelity of everything is extremely high. It looks very, very natural. The lighting, animation, shadowing and everything. There's just none of the telltale real-time rendering issues here that you see. And it also kind of sets the stage and the tone for where they're going with this game, of course. But that's about it, because it is ultimately kind of a tonal piece more than anything else. There's not a lot we can pull from it. That said, when you actually look at the visuals, I do think it looks phenomenally good, and the detail level is very high. But I can also say it's not necessarily like worlds away from something like Hellblade 2 visually. You know what I mean? Like, that's a much more simple game in terms of what it does versus what The Witcher 4 will be. But to me, the actual fidelity seems kind of comparable in a weird way. I don't know. Does that seem like a reasonable take?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I just don't know what to say really because cinematic trailer pre-rendered in Unreal Engine 5. All bets are off. You can basically do anything. This is an engine that's used for motion pictures. So
exactly.
But at the same time, there is some stuff here that I agree with you. It does kind of look feasible. Lighting looks feasible. It just looks really well done, right?
Yep.
Skin shading feasible. It is sort of comparable to Hellblade. Materials work, I think they could do that in real time.
Yep.
Cloth physics, yes. Maybe it's just the case that, like the post-processing is possibly ramped up to levels that might not be doable.
Exactly what I was thinking, right? Like the motion blur, the general image quality, like I feel like the real-time thing would have a bit more aliasing, a bit more noise, ghosting, artifacts, the typical things that you expect to find in a real-time game versus a pre-rendered one.
Yeah.
But everything else about what's actually happening seems very feasible. Although, again, knowing what The Witcher is, like this is obviously extremely cinema-oriented versus like what the game will actually look like while playing. So
yeah, it's actually quite interesting at the beginning of the trailer with the father of the sacrifice victim. There was actually a bit of hair aliasing on there, so it does
that's true.
Kind of look plausibly real, if you see what I mean.
Also,
even if it is a pre-render.
After she cuts the head of the monster off and kind of looking up towards the sky, you kind of catch some of those thin hair strands, which kind of pick up the light, and that has a bit of a gamey, angular look to it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So there's definitely telltale signs of this being like stuff intended for real-time display, even if it is a pre-render.
Mm-hmm. Oliver, what do you think?
I did note a lot of that aliasing in the hair and the depth of field as I was watching it because it's a little bit confusing. They say it's pre-rendered on an RTX, 5090 or something, an unannounced RTX GPU, but that did seem to me like something that maybe was plausible in real time, maybe on a very high-end graphics card, who knows. But this to me looks better than any game I've ever seen, probably, at least during cutscenes.
That's right.
Really hard to evaluate exactly what that means. But there are some signs of this could be a production-ready thing, possibly, or some relevance to production here. Because you look at some of the assets in some of those zoom-ins towards the end of the sequence, and, the rocks don't look impeccable in terms of the geometry. Like John said, the hair looks a little bit angular there. You do see a little bit of texture work that isn't totally impeccable at like a super, super close distance, which makes me think like, oh yeah, that could be a game asset. In terms of technology, I mean, you could get a better sense of it if it was gameplay or if you could actually control this in some demo context there. But yeah, I mean, it looks like really, really good. I'm not going to say outrageously good. I agree with John that it's kind of an ilk with some other Unreal Engine 5 efforts. It's just kind of pushed to that next level in terms of the complexity and detail and consistency of everything.
Interesting.
I think the point about it really got me thinking about Hellblade, really, because Hellblade really is just unbelievably good looking, right? It's just, I don't think we've reached the point where Hellblade is a very, very cinematic style game. It's extremely limited in what you can and cannot do, right? So like achieving that fidelity at a large scale is kind of the thing. I guess that's what we could say they might be chasing here.
Okay. I mean, another thing to bear in mind is that obviously, NVIDIA being name-checked in there's got to be some significance to it. You do have to wonder, bearing in mind the very close association between NVIDIA and CD Projekt Red, whether there is possibly some kind of new next-generation graphics technology being deployed here. We're getting maybe a hint of it for the first time. Obviously, the pre-rendered stuff can mean anything, but you kind of have to wonder whether, possibly, bearing in mind what we're seeing here, the pre-rendered angle is simply just to solve any performance problems that there might be from a real-time deployment of the same asset. So, yeah, I mean, lots to think about here. I wonder whether stuff's going to come into focus when the 50 series is actually announced.
Right. I think it looks pretty scalable, though. That's the thing. When you look at everything here, there's nothing about this that couldn't be scaled down.
Really?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you don't need that same fidelity. Like look at something. It's not nearly at that level, mind you, but think about Indiana Jones, right? That we just talked about. When you look at the ray trace lighting, you have the top full RT option all the way down to Series S. There's a wide range there, and you can see the way they're able to save performance. And it does have implications for the visual quality, but I think all that stuff is very much there.
Yeah.
There's nothing here about like the character models, for instance, that we haven't seen before. It's not like some new benchmark in terms of detail level, I would say.
If you pause the frame and look through some of these scenes, especially the action scenes, like the characters are clearly not being modeled to like feature film levels of fidelity or anything.
No, not at all. Exactly.
They look good, and there are some things there that like are quite attractive, like the teeth there on the characters, very nicely modeled, and the faces. Everything's nicely modeled for a video game asset, but it's also clearly like these could be conceivably game assets that you'd see on like a PS5 title, maybe. This does not look that crazy to me in that context. It's just the lighting here that's like really next level stuff relative to what you get on a normal console for sure.
Right, especially the scene after she kills the beast and walking back through the forest to the villagers. I thought that was just phenomenal.
Yeah, it looks amazing.
Hellblade really has kind of set a new bar, really, hasn't it? In kind of making us think that this is even viable.
Exactly. Hellblade, like, we can't give that enough praise in terms of what it does visually. Whatever the game may be, the visual presentation is outstanding.
Interesting. Anything more to add to this? I mean, it's all highly speculative at the moment. Obviously, we can get an idea of the tone that they're setting for the piece. We've got some idea of, these look like production level assets, I think, rather than just, stuff made up for a trailer. But beyond that, we're kind of, I don't know. It's just pure speculation, right?
Yeah.
I think at the same time, though, that CD Projekt Red obviously is aware of prior reveals of their games and how things didn't really pan out at launch. And is acutely aware of the expectation level that they're setting with this and that they're going to have to achieve it to some degree. But at the same time, the concept of a cinematic trailer gives them a bit of leeway there. And I guess also the idea, let's assume that this sequence actually ends up in the game itself. When you're doing cinematics within a game, that obviously opens up a lot more leeway to developers as well, because they're completely in control of what's being rendered and they can budget accordingly. Let's think about the timescales, though, just before we wrap up. I mean, even if this game is 4 years out, right? Say it's coming out in 2028, it's still got to support PlayStation 5 realistically in order to get the realistically audience.
To make money.
Yeah, so this does have to be scalable. It's got to launch on PlayStation 5, and it's got to be basically playable on a range of PC hardware.
We said the same thing about Cyberpunk. Remember when we first saw those reveals in the theaters at the various game shows, right? And they ended up, we were like, how's this going to work on Xbox One? The answer was, well, not very well. But it did. Yeah. They got it to work. It's just, so like... Let's be honest here. Like CD Projekt Red's track record on consoles, especially at release, it's not great. They are willing to push games really hard, in a way that really shines on PC, but maybe goes a little too far in the consoles. Witcher 3 was the same. It was not good at launch.
And this is an open world UE5 on top of all that.
Yeah, and they're mastering this new engine. It's just there's a lot, and also we know CD Projekt Red is not like. They are absolutely on board with doing PC features that only the PC version gets, right? Yeah. So that's another thing.
There's been a lot of comments online about how, it's Unreal Engine 5. There's a lot of trepidation around that. I'm actually okay with that based on some of the presentations that they've been doing, where they're acknowledging the faults of the engine and looking to mitigate, if not cure, the issues with like doing an open world on that engine. They're fully aware of the issues there. I think we've just got to have a bit more faith in them. And obviously, we'll see more of the game going forward.
I sure hope so. But again, like I'm saying, maybe on PC, but like their console track record's not good in terms of performance at launch, right? Like that's not good. But I mean, there are going to be studios that ship impressive, smooth running UE5 games using the features. Even those possibly targeting 60 FPS. Like, I think we can still expect the Coalition to knock things out of the park.
Yeah.
Will CD Projekt Red be able to do it? We don't yet know, but we're going to find out.
Okay. Okay, good stuff. Let's move on. Another big game revealed at the Game Awards 2024, the new one from Naughty Dog, Intergalactic, the Heretic Prophet. We had an announcement trailer, which seems to be a combination of cinematics and, but they are saying captured on PlayStation 5. Looks interesting, a complete departure from The Last of Us. Oliver, you were right. They are indeed doing a sci-fi game.
Yes.
I was kind of thinking that they would be banking on another Last of Us entry, but here we are, new IP. I'm going to go to you first on this one, actually, Oliver. What do you think?
Oh boy, yeah, I'd love a new Last of Us entry for sure. You're really tempting me there, but I mean, this looks phenomenal to me. I think this looks really great. I was watching this live and I didn't know what to expect at all, but as soon as they pulled up on that close-up of the main character right at the beginning, I knew it was a Naughty Dog title, because the stylization of that character, everything about her, it just looks so much like The Last of Us Part 2. She looked just like a WLF troop from that game. If you kind of pulled them out of that game into this one, increased the fidelity a little bit, you're kind of getting that appearance there. But I think this looked outstanding. And in part, that's because this looks kind of achievable to me. The game is coming out for PS5 consoles initially, but there's some interesting technology that I think we're looking at here.
Oh, yeah.
The first thing that stood out to me was I think we're getting ray traced reflections here. The opening shot in the mirror actually is probably not an example of RT reflections, I would think, just based off the high detail level and accuracy and coherency in that reflection. And it's also a flat reflection, which makes it a lot easier. But throughout the rest of the piece, you can see all kinds of little reflections of the main character in her coffee cup and monitors and glass. And then at the very end, there's a shot that would kind of be impossible if you were just relying on screen space reflections. Of course, Naughty Dog does like to use planar reflections in their games, which I think is what's being used for the mirror there in that first scene. So it is possible that they're using planar reflections for these shots instead. But in a game with reflective detail that looks reasonably consistent and extensive like this, you'd usually expect that to be more ray tracing based. But yeah, I mean, I think the art here, the character rendering, all the small scale detail in the ship cockpit, it looks beautiful. This is a small scale scene for the most part, but I think it looks fantastic. And the other part of it that's very interesting is that it's running at 60 FPS locked, pretty much here. Mm-hmm. And it's subjectively, like I put my face right up next to the screen, and it subjectively looks pretty 4K like here. That's really surprising. I don't know that we have confirmation on this, and I really don't know if it is real time or not, or if it's offline.
No, they usually are very good about, they say in-game cinematics captured on PS5. Okay. And Sony's been very good about specifically spelling out what's real time or not in that way.
Yeah, I mean, if it is real time, that's extremely impressive, because it's a 4K like image, not much aliasing. That would be really impressive, especially at this early stage in development. If this was to be running in real time, it looks to me though this looks like very plausible. Like you look at this and there's nothing to me that says this is not going to run into PS5. It looks like something that could run into PS5. PS5 at 60 FPS with this image quality though, that seems very, very impressive. I'm sort of reminded of that initial Uncharted 4 trailer that's so infamous. That certainly comes to mind here. But you know, even if it's not quite at this level of pristineness, the idea that we would get something like this on a PlayStation 5, I think it still looks fantastic, and I'm really excited to see what they do with it.
Interesting. Yeah, plausibility. I mean, you're right. They're the masters of actual transparency. You know, they always tell you what you're going to get in a trailer, which I think is very, very laudable. Is there any potential get-outs here? I mean, you know, in-game cinematics captured on PS5. Well, if they're saying it's captured on PS5, I'd say it's not captured from PS5 Pro, because if it was, they'd say so. In-game cinematics, though, it could be a pre-rendered video sequence. If you go back in the day to the way Naughty Dog used to do their cutscenes, they were, you know, video based, but they were basically engine renders that were dumped frame by frame.
Don't believe that they would go back to that, Rich. I'd say there's like a 0% chance of that. They've gone past that. And from what I understand, one of the main reasons they did that on PS3 as well was specifically to overcome loading issues to keep the game seamless.
Okay, well, let's talk about the segment at the end with the sword. That I'd say is obviously gameplay. I don't think you could pre-render that. Well, you could, but it would be couldn't be a great way to present the game. It looks super, super clean, right? That scene is almost basically a statement of intent about ray tracing there.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
There's
The whole
so many
trailer
potential
is-
failure. So many potential failure points there for SSR. I think that's one of the reasons why it was in there, to be honest.
Yeah, you're right. Big red laser swords over water
Yes.
with SSR is a nightmare. It never looks good.
Yeah, so what can I say? I think it looks great. It does look super, super clean. The character rendering, classic Naughty Dog, but again, just looks awesome. Yeah, again, materials. I mean, what can you say? This is basically a progression of The Last of Us. A game. I guess it's their first actual game that's designed for PlayStation 5, which is quite
Correct.
remarkable, bearing in mind we're 4 years into the generation. There was no indication of when it's actually coming out, though, is there?
No.
I think they've said it's been in development for 4 years, right?
That's
Yeah.
correct. There was The Last of Us Part 1, which it was kind of developed. I mean, it's a PS5
Yeah,
console exclusive, but I get what you're saying there. In terms of the underlying technology, it's not a big progression beyond The Last of Us Part 2. It's pretty comparable in a lot of respects. But I would say here that, like, I'm just glad that Naughty Dog is pushing forward with their own technology, their own look to this.
Yep.
And they might be trying some things in terms of image quality and performance that we're unlikely to see from the likes of, say, The Witcher 4 on current gen consoles as a result there. So I hope they can achieve that visual target while still sticking to those things. But I mean, to your point, Rich, this level of image quality at 60 FPS on a base PS5 in real time, I'm struggling with that to believe
Yeah,
that's the case.
I'm
I'm struggling.
skeptical.
I'm really struggling. PS5 Pro would even be a stretch in some respects here,
Yeah.
but I think that there's something going on there that's not quite indicative of the way the final game will ship, but we'll have to see, obviously, on that one.
There's another thing you didn't mention, Oliver, that I think is worth pointing out is the shadow quality. Like, look at 307 in the trailer, and throughout they have a lot of very clean, fine self shadows on the main character all over the place, and there's just shadows all throughout the trailer. And there's no artifacting, no typical shadow map artifacts. They get very, very soft and diffuse. Like when she walks out of the room with the mirror, you see her pass like all those pictures on the wall. You get that really soft shadow from the distant light, yet the shadows from the pictures themselves are all beautifully defined, like the little needles in there, everything's super sharp right up against the wall. So like look at the you see the hole punched sheet like over her shoulder at 125, like every little hole was represented with a shadow.
Yeah.
That's not really something you can do with shadow maps normally.
No.
Unless you had like there are tricks that can be done to allow really fine, close proximity shadows. We've seen that before. Like Final Fantasy 16 is pretty good at that. But like to do it at this scale here, that's another thing that's like, wait, is that like RT shadows?
Yeah.
On top of all this? Like there's just so much going on in terms of fidelity there where you're like, huh.
That's very interesting
Yeah.
that you pointed out there. Also, at like about 106, you see that mirror and the way that it falls off away from the camera. That little mirror there looks very impressive, and also to me, one thing that sticks out too is that point of contact is super clear. Like it's not like there's a gap there, which you see with shadow maps.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Exactly.
That's a
That's the
good
thing.
point.
It's like, so when you have all those together, it's like it's potentially doing all these ray tracing features, which would be cool to see.
Yeah.
But like it's doing all that at 60 FPS with 4K like image quality, like that just seems like a bridge too far as well, right? Like you're like, can they really do this?
Even though this is like mostly a pretty cinematic presentation, like, yeah, you're right. The consistency, quality, variable penumbra, the way there's no gap, all that
There's
stuff.
no gap.
Yeah, there's no gap. I mean, it just looks super. I mean,
I know
it does
it's
look like
perfectly rooted.
Yeah, it does look like RT shadows the more you mention it. But I'd also say that what we're seeing here, like a lot of other titles, is pretty consistent with what you get with VSMs as well, virtual shadow maps. So it could be something like that here. I'm not too sure, but it certainly could be RT shadows as well.
My guess is that we might see something similar to Uncharted 4, where the initial reveal is just a little bit higher fidelity than what actually ships, but still comparable. But in reality, like with the PS5 Pro, I went back and was loading up Uncharted 4 again, and it kind of struck me that there's still games coming out today that I think look worse than Uncharted 4. Like, I was playing through Space Marine 2, for instance, and I'm like, you know what? This game looks a lot worse than Uncharted 4 overall, despite the huge numbers of enemies. That's very cool, but like, visually speaking, and there's a bunch of games I feel like this lately where you just look at the character models, you look at the level of detail, and you're like, this doesn't actually really exceed what Naughty Dog did in 2016 on a base PS4 in a lot of ways.
And even with Uncharted 4, it's like they had a big game, big wide open gameplay spaces, really exciting chase sequences with tons of physics and crazy stuff going on everywhere. Yeah. It's like a big game. It's not like Hellblade 2 where we're like, this is a really constrained game. The visuals are incredible. This is like, the visuals are incredible. And it's like a game that if you released it today, people would be like, oh, the game is so big. There are so many exciting moments. There's so much stuff.
We go all over the world.
Go all over the world.
Tons of gameplay scenarios, like freaking the boat, the driving through the town, like just the amount of the destruction, everything going on, like doing that at that level. Like, so I would like to have a little faith in Naughty Dog here in terms of like, they do tend to surprise, and we haven't seen a PS5 game from them yet. So maybe they've really figured something out. Maybe this is still a little bit too high fidelity for what we just don't know. All I'll say is I'm just happy though that we're seeing something new from them. I think it's cool that they decide to go sci-fi. I like The Last of Us, but I'm tired of The Last of Us. I did not need another zombie game from them, like in that depressing dark world anymore. Like, the world is dark enough these days. Like, we don't need that anymore. It's time to move on. This has a bit more of the Uncharted adventurous spirit to it. I hope. It certainly seems like it will. And also the idea of planet hopping and going to different locales, there's some interesting potential here. Plus like melee combat like that with a sword and all that, like what's that going to be? Like there's a lot of questions still. I think this could be really, really cool. And I'm happy that they got the chance to actually do it, as opposed to just like, here's more Last of Us, you will like it.
Well, I'll tell you what, that's some fighting talk there, because I think Oliver's going to hunt you down.
I'm sorry, Oliver. I'm sorry. I see that smile. Like there's
yeah.
You're like, oh, I'm gonna rip your head off after this direct.
No, I think I can restrain myself. I understand The Last of Us fatigue, even if I'm not there myself.
That's fine.
But there's only been 2 games. Well, including the remasters and the remasters of the remaster.
There have been 5 games, really, between the 2 remasters and the 1 remake and the 2 main titles. So, yeah, but 2 games, 5 games, however you slice it, people are hoping for Naughty Dog to do something different. I'm glad they are. But I am a little bit disappointed, I will admit, that it pushes the prospect of a video game version of The Last of Us Part 3, at least, out into the 2030s, at least, probably.
The thing is, though, as well, like a sci-fi world that they've chosen here is a perfect place to use. If they've invested in these new ray tracing technologies, it's a great place to use it, right? All the shiny surfaces and materials. Like Last of Us is a very matte kind of place.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, my final thoughts on this is, well, what can I say? Obviously, a lot of people accuse us of pixel peeping and like pointing out flaws and stuff.
They get real mad about that.
And here's the thing about this trailer. I'm finding it very, very difficult to actually find any kind of artifacts or things that look wrong, glowing objects that shouldn't be glowing, hair artifacting, anything of that description, any sort of aliasing of any description. It just looks pristine from start to finish. And I think this says 2 things to me. Well, assuming this is the game and this is how it's going to present, well, what can I say? When a company gets it so right and you get a presentation that looks this clean, this good, I think anybody should be able to recognize that and recognize that this is actually a really stunning looking game. And it's kind of like where everything comes together, everything looks consistent. It's actually quite amusing that the artifacts you do see in there, like, the Moiré patterns on the screens, are actually in there by design.
Right.
So,
dude, like their CRT simulation, when they zoom into that screen, that's so good. That's really good looking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, the only sort of stuff that looks a bit odd is because that's actually what they're looking to achieve visually. Mm-hmm. Everything else just looks absolutely pristine and kind of real world as it should, within a sort of through the Naughty Dog kind of lens, if you see what I mean. But yeah, it's quite interesting when you were starting to talk about the shadows there, because that is usually quite an obvious failing point. And yet there they are, and they look great. So Well, it is just an announcement trailer, but they are saying it's captured on PlayStation 5. We have to take them at their word. I am getting shades of the old Uncharted 4 reveal, but at the same time, well,
Yeah.
let's
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 find
give
out.
them a
Naughty Dog
chance.
their moment.
Give 'em a chance.
Absolutely. Okay, brilliant. Let's move on to our
Onward.
next highlight. So a bit of a deviation, I think, from the sort of AAA titles that we usually highlight in these Game Award and similar events. I've got to say, Split Fiction, I thought this was one of the standout presentations of the entire show. I thought it looked absolutely amazing. And I think the presentational method they chose to showcase the game was also best in class. It wasn't just sort of imagery thrown in your direction. There was actually direction from the developer telling you what to look for in this game, what makes it great. John, thoughts on this one?
Oh my. So yeah, these guys have kind of become known for their unique take on co-op.
Yeah.
Obviously the last game, It Takes Two, was so good that I actually had it on my Game of the Year list the year it came out. I played through that with my son, and man, that was fun. This basically continues that. Only the idea here is that you're basically controlling like two authors, fiction writers that are like essentially like trapped in their own worlds via some mechanism, whatever. But the one writer writes science fiction, the other writes fantasy. And it seems like each stage, similar to It Takes Two, is going to offer like new mechanics, new concepts, and it's going to be split between, the sci-fi world and the fantasy world as they kind of work their way through it. And they kind of walk you through that. And that's what I like. It starts with this initial presentation kind of setting it up, but then Joseph comes on. He's pretty much like, so here's some examples of how that'll work. And yeah, sure enough, they do show various like, gameplay bits, and it is very much in the vein of It Takes Two, or before that, A Way Out, where the two players have to work together to get through different challenges. Sometimes it's platforming, there's like flying, there's the Metroid ball thing that they show at one point.
Yeah.
There's a lot of cool stuff in here, and
Sausages.
this is the only trailer I need to see essentially for this game, where it's like, okay, yeah, I'm now sold. I will play this game right away and probably enjoy it a lot. I mean, there's nothing really tech-wise to talk about other than it's cool to have to, they're managing everything that they're doing here, but have to do it in split screen, which is always the challenge. And the way they play around with split screen is always something. So that there is something to be said for that, but it does look pretty visually standard in a way that I would say it still looks like probably Unreal Engine 4 even. Did they say otherwise? I mean, it could be using 5, and that's just, but there's nothing going on here that's like taking advantage of those features, of the big features of UE5, I would say. But it's still an attractive game.
I think attractive is possibly an understatement. I thought it looked fantastic, and I think it's actually
you're right.
Go on.
It's a little harsh. No, please go ahead. I don't mean to take anything away from it in that regard.
Yeah, I think my point is that if you obviously they've designed a game that's designed to be played in split screen, right? And this is not an insignificant undertaking.
No,
the concepts that you've basically got to budget for two independent viewpoints at any given point means that you've got to build your entire visual design around that concept. You've got to build your rendering budgets around that concept, and to do that and to achieve some of the visuals that you're seeing here. The sci-fi world with all the shiny surfaces, I thought in particular looked absolutely fantastic. Some of the set pieces that they're doing, rendering simultaneously on both screens, the amount of effort that had to go into that to make it still look great and to work in split screen. This is like pretty amazing stuff, in my opinion.
absolutely. That's very, very true, especially since they seem to be going for 60 FPS again, as they did with the last one.
Which is amazing. Yeah. And I think, it is just basically testament to the just classy design, right? You could achieve, I think possibly the best example is Yooka-Laylee Impossible Lair, a game that was designed for Nintendo Switch, designed to run at 60 frames per second on Nintendo Switch, but you can play it on a PlayStation, much more powerful piece of hardware, PlayStation PC, and it still looks great. And that's because of great design right at the very beginning and throughout the project. And if that is sort of transferred across to this, with that split screen concept, I mean, what can I say? I just thought this taster was just awesome. And also 3 minutes of actual discussion about the game, the developer laying out their vision for it. Here's the thing, right? Geoff is kind of presenting the Game Awards as almost like a sort of, and I kind of get the idea, and it's laudable to present games as a medium on par with like motion pictures. I think that's fine. So, you know, trailers are obviously the obvious way to do it. But at the same time, the difference between games and movies is that games are interactive. Games are, you know, what you make of them. And what this trailer did was to actually give the audience an insight of what it's actually like to play. You know, you're not just watching it passively. You know, they're giving you an idea of how you're going to interact with the game. I thought that was pretty awesome. Oliver,
absolutely.
Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this looks phenomenal here. That split screen concept, certainly what they're doing here is quite interesting. And I totally agree with you that this kind of semi-extended gameplay-ish narrative thing really does work to show off these games in a way that is compelling to people and also conveys exactly what those games are about. But these, you know, a game that is a co-op title that's only split screen, it does limit possibly certain things, although there is a level of commitment there and a level of achievement that you probably could not get if you were not so committed to that concept. So for me personally, I think this looks fantastic. I'd have to scrounge through my Rolodex to find someone to play it with, is my possible concern there.
The Rolodex.
Yeah, maybe my cell phone contacts book, perhaps. Let's make it more contemporary.
Maybe even your console friend list.
Maybe even my friend list. Who knows?
Find them in the Rolodex and hit them up on their pager.
Yeah, but I'm really happy this game exists. I hope it's a really high quality effort there, because I think that this game is really something special there. But just for a limited audience, which is totally fine and totally good. But it is what it is.
What I also enjoyed about it was the fact that they highlighted that it's a split screen game, but it is, you know, obviously playable online, and you don't need to have two people buying the game in order to play it online, which is crucial to, you know, a crucial message to get across to the audience, because it's like, well, you know, are we going to have to buy multiple copies of the game? Obviously not, but you know, the mechanism I think is quite clever in that, you know, essentially if you're playing it with your friend, and your friend wants to play it with another friend, then they do need to buy the game. So it's, you know, it's a very, very clever mechanic, I think. Okay, let's move on to our next TGA highlight. Okay, so Game Awards 2024. Elden Ring is back. Elden Ring Nightreign. It's quite interesting that earlier in the week there was news that there isn't going to be an Elden Ring sequel, or at least it's not in the planning stages as of yet. And yet here we are at the awards with a new Elden Ring game, but it is something quite different. John, what are your thoughts on the trailer that was offered up here for our viewing pleasure?
Man, that's a tricky one, because Elden Ring is a game that I absolutely adore. It was my game of the year it came out as well. But when you toss in multiplayer on anything, it instantly starts to get concerning, unless, you know, so obviously the prior game we just discussed is multiplayer, and that those games have found a really interesting new idea for it. Yeah, maybe From Software will as well. After all, their games were known for the sort of like passive multiplayer already. So I am certainly open to see what they do with this here. But I'm wondering what that means in terms of how the game world is designed, what you do in the game. And there's just so many questions still that I have. But I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt here, because these guys know how to make freaking awesome games. What can I say? In terms of technology, though, this looks like Elden Ring, like yes, almost to a T. And the trailer itself was shown. I don't know how it was during the actual show, Oliver, but the trailer that was uploaded afterward is just 4K 30, and I mean, I think we can assume it's going to be that same old unlocked frame rate, probably not stable. Maybe they'll have their ray trace shadows again that run really bad. I don't know, man. I would like to see. That's remains my big complaint with From stuff. I actually think Elden Ring is a beautiful game artistically, and those vistas are awesome, but the tech it's a little bit janky still, and I don't see anything in this that makes me think that's suddenly going to change.
What do you think, Oliver?
Yeah, I mean, visually, this is kind of disappointing. My main disappointment has actually got nothing to do with the graphics. It's just the target platforms, because this is a game that's coming out next year. They're shipping it on PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. Wow.
Xbox freaking One.
Xbox One. 12-year-old consoles by the time the game comes out. So that's not great. Visually, it looks a lot like Elden Ring. Probably not a huge surprise there. Yes.
Yep.
The grass is kind of flat without obvious ambient shadowing, just picking apart a couple things here. The sun, you get some nice shadows from the sun, but nothing else. No other light sources are giving you that shadowing there. The models are kind of last gen vintage, would be possibly even slightly generous in some respects. You have kind of SSR artifacts, obvious SSR artifacts in lieu of RT reflections. It's just not like there are a lot of, in particular, lighting problems that current gen games are often trying to tackle. And unsurprisingly, there's like no effort here to try to deal with those issues. So,
but hey, at least it just occurred to me, Oliver, you mentioned the last gen platforms. At least this means you can get a 60 FPS version if you play the PS4 version on PS5.
That's brutal. Yeah. Well, don't get me started on the From stuff, but that's I suspect that may indeed be the case, John. As sad as it makes me too. Oh well,
they're gonna make this PS5 Pro compatible, and that's just gonna mean increasing the res or doing something that makes the frame rate even worse.
I was just about to say, please don't enhance this for PS5 Pro. Please don't enhance this for PS5 Pro.
Well, unfortunately, they have to. That's kind of like that's a given. But it could just be the fact that the unlock frame rate just runs faster. Who knows? Let's give them their credit. Armored Core 6 was a progression in technology terms, right? The question is whether that progression is actually going to be rolled back to a game that looks very much like Elden Ring.
Exactly.
And as you say, it is coming out on Xbox One and PlayStation 4, which is eye-opening to say the least. And I can only assume that that's happening because it's actually technologically viable for that to happen. But then again, I think Armored Core was also on PlayStation, right?
Right, so, it was.
But let's give them the benefit of the doubt for now. But that said, the trailer certainly looks completely unsurprising from a technological perspective. But, ultimately it's Elden Ring. Elden Ring plays great. The concept of a multiplayer Elden Ring, I'd say, is certainly intriguing and worth checking out. So let's wait and see how it turns out.
And hey, I feel like Elden Ring is the perfect game to highlight. Obviously in Digital Foundry, we nitpick graphics. That's what we do a lot. And people sometimes take issue with that. But I think the fact that Elden Ring was at least some of our games it was our game of the year it came out, shows that ultimately, even with the jank, it's still about the game, So we can nitpick this all over the place, but still love it. And that's probably what's going to happen here.
Okay, let's talk about our final sort of highlight game of the whole show, and that is Mafia, or rather Mafia, as it's pronounced in North America. Mafia Old World. Obviously, these guys really know what they're doing from a technological perspective. The remaster was pretty awesome, and this presentation is looking, I'd say, out of this world. Oliver, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I thought this looked absolutely outstanding. I don't know if they've confirmed this or not, but it looks very, very obviously UE5 to me. The characters look great.
Sorry, I just have to hop in because I feel like, these guys very specifically invested a lot in their own technology, right? And the Mafia remaster, which was even on last gen, was designed for last gen, looked phenomenally good. Was doing some really crazy stuff with the tech. I feel like I'd be surprised if they abandoned all that for Unreal.
Well, they have, because I've just checked out a post. Just checked out a post from Xbox Wire.
No,
where it's basically a developer interview. So this is straight from the developer here. Google has actually done a good job for once in highlighting a specific quote. We've also switched to Unreal Engine 5 for the development of Mafia the old country, which has allowed for an even higher level of visual fidelity than previous Mafia titles. Our environments and characters are more lifelike and believable than ever before, which I can't say I disagree with.
Sure.
Yeah, maybe, there is a certain degree of Unreal Engine 5 fatigue, but these guys know their stuff, right? Anyway, Oliver.
Yeah, I mean,
talking.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just the quality of the characters and the quality of the environments, the quality of the lighting, that consistency there. It wasn't that long ago that stuff like this was the exclusive providence of offline CG, and to see this all brought together, even in cinematic form, looks very, very nice. It's very movie-like here, I'd say, the little snippets that we do have. As is always the case with these kinds of trailers, I would have liked to have seen more gameplay or just long shots of things. In this case, we have kind of like one shot that's sort of a gameplay camera, nothing that could really resemble gameplay here. Because making cinematics that look incredible like this is a lot easier than achieving that same level of quality in gameplay. But yeah, overall, I thought this looked terrific, and I'm excited to see more from this game.
I mean, yeah, I'm just disappointed by this revelation that it's Unreal Engine 5. I mean, again, not that there's anything necessarily... I think they can obviously do something amazing with it, but like they were doing such cool stuff with their own in-house tech, so it's a bit of a shame. But either way, what they're doing here does look very compelling, and these guys know how to tell a gosh darn good story, I will say. And I've always enjoyed the sort of game design. So this does seem to be the same studio that did Mafia 3 and the remake then, which Hangar 13, because...
Yeah, it is Hangar 13. Mm-hmm.
So I think they were kind of like a mix. I forget the whole lineage there, but there was originally, I think it was the Czech studio that did the original 2. Maybe there's still some connection there. But either way, I've always enjoyed this series. And it's not... Mafia 3 did lean a little bit heavily on side mission stuff, but the remake, I thought, really nailed the vibe of what makes Mafia great, and that it is ultimately like you have this extra world to explore, but it's a vehicle for telling a cool story and making cool scenarios, rather than like an open world playground where you're just doing repetitive tasks. So let's hope that I really hope that they can deliver that again in this environment. So
yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, I really enjoyed the trailer, but you're quite right. In terms of gameplay content, there wasn't really a huge amount to it. Yeah. It's coming summer 2025, according to that Xbox Wire post that Google just unearthed for me. So we don't got a huge amount of time to wait, and hopefully we'll actually be seeing more of the actual game. There were sort of hints in the trailer that, as you say, Oliver, what could be construed as a gameplay camera or something approximating it. And, the assets just look out of this world. What can I say? On every level, I think this is technologically awesome. And again, it's another game, going back to The Witcher 4, where you look at this and it's coming relatively soon. And, suddenly what you're seeing in The Witcher 4 doesn't look like, something that's technologically completely out of reach when you're seeing this happening on a game that's happening next year. So, yeah, I mean, kudos to Hangar 13. Can't wait to see more. Okay, so let's move on. We can now step down to GEOFFCON 2. We can talk about some of the smaller or still highly significant games that caught our eye. And you two have each put together a list of games that you'd like to quickly discuss. Now, some of these games we can't sort of expand out into full DF Direct segments because, let's face facts, there was very little shown. Very, very little. John, let's start with your list, which is, a few interesting titles here. Let's kick off with Ninja Gaiden Ragebound, which you're very excited about, and having seen the last third of the trailer that they put out. 2/3 of the trailer is just like completely irrelevant to the gameplay, but the last third is indeed looking awesome, right?
Yeah, exactly. So they actually show a good amount of gameplay in the last third of the trailer. And on paper, the idea of Ninja Gaiden with the Ragebound and Metroidvania, those types of things going together, that doesn't actually excite me. But when you actually see it being played, the visual design, knowing that it's the team behind Blasphemous, which is an excellent game, those two actually, then it gets exciting. We haven't had a 2D Ninja Gaiden game in a very long time, and what they're showing here just looks fan-freaking-tastic as far as pixel art goes. Like, the thing about pixel art is, like, I'm not of the belief that, like, it's an inherently retro thing to do. There are ways to make your game look old and retro, but I think that this is not one of those cases. This is clearly a case where they're utilizing pixel art as, like, essentially their medium. It's their canvas to create some really striking two-dimensional art that has a lot, like, you can tell that a ton of work was poured into getting all the shading and lighting right on all the tiles and generate everything in just the right way, that it has this, like, beautiful look that's very, very just attractive, pulls you in. Blasphemous was also great in that regard, so I'm not too surprised given the pedigree there. But on top of that, everything just looks smooth and fast and slick, and I'm excited to play it. So really happy to see this partnership happening. And we've seen a lot of great stuff from these partnerships between Japanese companies and, like, new Western, like, indie teams that have sort of tackled it. I mean, that's how we got stuff like Sonic Mania, Streets of Rage 4, and the like. So next year we should get Ninja Gaiden Ragebound and the new Shinobi, hopefully, from the Streets of Rage 4 guys. So it's going to be 2 ninja games back to back. Exciting.
And this looks really fantastic. Project Robot from GenDesign.
I would say GenDesign, probably. Okay. So Ueda-san and his team, obviously the legacy here being Shadow of the Colossus, Ico, Last Guardian. This looks like another, like, essentially a new take on that. It's their latest game. And instantly the footage they show, which I would very much believe is captured from whatever they're developing as far as, like, actual game footage made to look cinematic, because it shows very similar sort of climbing mechanics that we saw in stuff like Shadow of the Colossus, only there's sort of a sci-fi twist where your character's scrambling to climb this very large robot as a timer's counting down, and clearly a cataclysmic event is about to occur, and then he sort of flies away as everything gets engulfed by it. He flies away in the head specifically. And it's just as you would expect from these guys, like, just the music, the visual design, the art, the concept, it's otherworldly, and it's just very, very striking. And because of what they've done in the past, I'm always willing to listen, and I'm always willing to see, like, what they're going to do next. And I really hope that this delivers on that front. And I hope it doesn't take as long to make as The Last Guardian, which I gather was somewhat limited by the fact that they were trying to do this, like, crazy, like, collision in physics between the two characters on a PS Triple at first, which I don't think the PS Triple was really designed to do, if you will. So that's exciting. After that, then we got to mention that Sega had a Virtua Fighter Direct, but at the Game Awards, they actually announced the arrival of a new Virtua Fighter project. And most of the trailer it's like these slow camera angles showing a battle happening around you, sort of setting the stage for what they want to achieve. But at the very end, they kind of show what looks like actual gameplay, fighting in that city street. And if that is indeed indicative of what they're doing, I think it's very promising, because there's a physicality to the characters and the way they move in 3D. Obviously with fighting games, the response and the control, getting that to feel right is difficult. And as a result, you often get, like, sort of like a bit of clipping through characters. It's like these animations play out, and the way that the other character reacts to the hits, it feels very kind of canned, if you will, and doesn't respond in the way that it actually might. Here, it seems like they might be trying to take that further. Like, when legs and arms and torsos, everything sort of connects, it feels like there's much more weight and actual physicality to it. And knowing Virtua Fighter's roots, that's an interesting idea, is to try to make this more visceral and more realistic, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. Those last few seconds of the trailer are tantalizing, I'd say. I think it looks absolutely awesome. I'll tell you what I think about this, Joe, because obviously Virtua Fighter, Virtua Fighter 2, Virtua Fighter 3, those games had such a profound impact on me as a
Yeah.
games player and as a journalist when they actually arrived, because they were like awesome to play. They were groundbreaking in gameplay terms, and technologically they were amazing. And 4 and 5 I was less taken with, because they're great games, of course, but there wasn't that technological leap associated with them, I'd venture to suggest. But just that little teaser at the end, it just looked fantastic. It looked like what I'd want from a next generation
Yeah.
Virtua Fighter. Maybe it's just a tease, I don't know, but wow, looks awesome.
Watching the direct though and listening to them talk, it really sounds like they've put a lot of effort into thinking about like, what does Virtua Fighter mean today? What can we do with it that's special? They clearly are taking this very seriously, and I actually think the stuff prior to what looks like game footage maybe sort of tips its hand in terms of what they're thinking. Like when they show them fighting, the stones rumbling, and you see the reflection in the glass and everything sort of reacting. To me, that says that what they're thinking about is interaction and like environmental like impact, not in the Dead or Alive way where it's these scripted things happening, but more like things around you and the characters themselves have much more of an impact in terms of weightiness, physicality to them. So I'm very curious to see what actually happens here. But
it's interesting because if you go back to VF3, there was actually some pushback about stuff like the undulating terrain and stuff, which basically disappeared in the following games.
yeah, sadly.
And there's always this balance between pushing technology and getting the core gameplay mechanics right. And they kind of shifted the balance to gameplay, which is entirely understandable. But for me, it was like, well, when I want to see a brand new Virtua Fighter game, I want to be wowed with something I've never seen before, which was kind of what VF 1, 2, and 3 did for me. And hopefully it will be the same with this one. Who knows? What's next on your list then?
Next up on the list then is, also from Ryuga Gotoku Studio. It's the Project Century, which seems to be sort of a take on the Like a Dragon series, but set, however, like 100 years in the past, I guess. It's an old time take on it. But the big thing here is that the way that they seem to initiate combat and the way they showed that is also quite a bit different, in that it just sort of seemed to happen seamlessly on the map rather than like as a separate battle sequence. So I'm curious what that means for it. I mean, the whole aesthetic there, I think, is really cool. I'm obviously excited for it, but it also just makes me think of like how incredible the output of RGG Studio really is when you really get right down to it, right? Like these guys, like most game studios, you're like, man, I wish they would release more games, where these guys are like, whoa, slow down a bit, guys. Like, I can't keep up with your output. That's where we're at with these guys. They're able to produce, they found a way to make these very compelling games, but do so in a way that's economical and fast.
I was about to say that, after Oliver, they're the hardest working people in the games industry.
It's honestly insane what they've managed to achieve here. And yeah, it's just so I'm eager. I'm always happy to follow these guys and see what they do next. So this is definitely another one to keep an eye on. And yeah, they like to do these sort of spin-off games, but it really is that new physicality with the combat that really has me intrigued, because they've not had combat that looks like what they show in this trailer before. So
absolutely.
That's
Alex
cool.
isn't here today, which is a shame because we're talking about Turok. It's back.
Yeah, I'm wondering what he'll think of this. So obviously these guys, Saber knows what's up. They know what they're doing. But this is like a proper Turok reboot thing, and it seems to be a third-person action game. The big question I have is like, what sort of game is this going to be? Because what we liked about Turok specifically, I think, is that it was sort of how would I say it? A search action game, a non-linear exploration-based action game. When they rebooted in 2008, it just became a very linear thing that wasn't nearly as compelling, I would say. So what are they doing with this? I will say I like the visual design. I think it actually does look cool, and I'm curious to see where it goes. It just doesn't seem to bear much resemblance to the older games. But hey, that's okay. I'm curious either way. I like where they're going with it. The last two, just to very quickly mention, because there's really not much to see. We got announcements from Capcom. We got a new Onimusha coming in 2026, apparently, which, it beat Dino Crisis to the punch. And I think it's freaking phenomenal that they're actually bringing Onimusha back, because this was a hot series during the PS2 era, right? They made 4 of them, and it's kind of like a weird follow-up to Power Stone, but Onimusha, if you remember, Gaiden, it was called. And then there was even a tactics game on GBA. Like, there was a lot of Onimusha happening, and then it just was like gone. It just disappeared. They never did anything with it for years and years and years. Here, though, visually, this, in the trailer that they showed, it's like, okay, yeah, this is clearly more RE engine goodness. It has all the trademark visual flair of Unreal, or sorry, I said Unreal, RE engine. You can't spell Unreal without RE though. It's in there, right? But this looks good. So I'm happy they're bringing that back. But what they showed less of was a new Okami game. So Kamiya-san is back at Capcom, and what feels like a big slight to Platinum in a way is they've sort of restarted Clover as Clovers, plural,
Right.
And he's doing it. So I think Kamiya-san has always had clearly a very big soft spot for Okami. And I think it's great that he's getting a chance to take another crack at it. And I will be very curious to see what it becomes, given how much time has passed since the original and what they've kind of learned since that. So, yeah, that's just some of the ones that stood out to me. But I think, Oliver, you've made a similar list of games that you wanted to mention, including, and your list also interests me, I will say. So take it away.
Yes, I have a somewhat briefer list, so hopefully I can truncate this a little bit and give you guys some content here. But there were a couple of games I thought were interesting. First of all, there's 2 PlayStation PC ports that I thought were kind of interest here. The first one is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth on PC. Now, of course, this is a game we thought was coming to PC, but there are a few little descriptors in this video. It's like a 30-second trailer, but they do list a couple little descriptors in there. One of the descriptors says improved lighting. The other one says improved textures and modeling. The other one says DLSS and VRR. So kind of going through those in order, I'm very, very curious to hear about what improved lighting means. Because some of the lighting issues we observed on PS5 are still here. Like that crazy aggressive shadow cascade for the highest res CSM there. You can see that same issue in the shots about 20 seconds in that shot, because you have the super high fidelity shadow that's very close to the camera and this super low fidelity shadow, low resolution shadow, closer to the characters, a little bit further afield. That's a concern. They appear very low resolution. To me, it looks very similar to PS5 in that respect. Improved GI might be a possibility. I'm not sure if I'm seeing a sign of that here. The background at about 10 seconds in still looks a little bit glowy to me. It's not clear what that could mean. They could revise the SSAO, of course, but it's UE Force. They kind of are limited in what they can probably realistically do given their development schedule, given the fact they're all in on the next Final Fantasy VII R entry, I would have to presume here. If they do improve the models, they talk about improving the models and textures, that's great. I'd say don't focus on the character models, which look amazing. Environmental art, please. There are some like kit bashed looking things in certain levels. Don't look that great.
Textures
for sure. Lots of low res textures in there. Hopefully they can improve that. It was unfortunate. Both the Final Fantasy VII R games are known for some textural and geometric issues. Hopefully they can clean those up a little bit, kind of like an Intergrade version, but in this case only for PC. That would be very exciting. The DLSS mentioned, that's great. I hope there's FSR and XCSS as well. Because those technologies
and more.
Yeah, those technologies are very, very important to gamers who are not playing on NVIDIA GPUs and who are playing on alternative platforms like the Steam Deck and ROG Ally that do not support it. And also I'd hope if they do add FSR to PC, maybe they could consider going back to PS5 and giving FSR2 a shot there, because that might improve things actually on PS5 in terms of getting 60 FPS image quality. System? Yeah, to a good level. A PS5 Pro, of course, is fine. Yeah, like you said, the base system is of some concern there. I have some questions about open world UE4 on PC, exactly how well that will go. It seems a little bit tenuous, but I'll give them the benefit of the doubt for now.
I mean,
hopefully
the last release was certainly known for its stuttering.
Yeah.
Let's be clear.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I guess there'll be a DX11 fallback, though. Possibly, if it's still using Unreal Engine 4. I think the favourite thing I've got about this list of enhancements is VRR, because they would not have actually had to do any kind of engineering effort in that whatsoever. It's just there. It's like saying, different resolutions. We're going to have different resolutions.
We'll have an options menu.
Usually, it's got an options menu, things that are a given. But this one, VRR, requires literally no effort. It's all done at the system level.
Partial mouse support.
Partial mouse support, yeah. Yes, choose a monitor. The weird things that sort of go.
Well, that is actually a feature I would love in more games. I'm so tired of games starting up on the wrong monitor. They love to do it.
So it does. As you go down the list, it does seem, by the end they just sort of they needed to fill out the space. They didn't have anything else to say. That's kind of the way it looks to me.
I have another pet peeve, a bone to pick with this. They uploaded this trailer. It's a 30 FPS trailer for a PC game.
Yeah,
right? Like, come on now.
Yeah. Okay. What can I say? I mean, obviously the quality of the game is one thing. But they've got it all to prove after the last remake they did, Final Fantasy VII remake, which was they never went back and fixed it on PC. That's the thing that really irks me. They made a sort of, well, what can I say, a bare bones effort to address some of the initial launch issues, but the crucial ones were never touched. That's outrageous. Mm-hmm. So hopefully they'll have learnt lessons from that, and this one will be a lot better. Who knows? I'm just going to approach this one with some level of trepidation, I think. Anyway, Oliver, the next one, The Last of Us Part 2 PC. It's coming March 25. Anything to glean from this trailer?
No. I mean, it's the remastered iteration of the game. To be honest, no.
But we've learned nothing new about it, about the PC version whatsoever. It's just The Last of Us coming to PC.
Yeah, I mean,
do you think it'll support VRR?
God only knows at this point, Rich. I don't know. That's an open question. Well, they didn't delineate it. They didn't say. Unlike Final Fantasy, no, they did say that. I'm just quoting from their release here. The teams at Nixis and Iron Galaxy have been hard at work in concert with Naughty Dog to ensure The Last of Us Part 2 remastered. It's a thrill for PC players from the jump. We'll be delving further into the PC-specific features and specs as we get closer to launch. So I would assume in this case, it's going to be similar, possibly, to The Last of Us Part 1 on PC. Mm-hmm. I hope it is a port that is in better shape initially than that game. But I would assume it's basically going to be your upscalers, your frame gen, maybe ultra-wide support, things like this, but not necessarily going to give you any kind of like really revolutionary features from like Intergalactic or anything like that, I'd assume.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, the presence of Nixis in the credits list there is obviously a comfort to a certain extent, because the faith in Iron Galaxy after The Last of Us Part 1 PC debacle is rock bottom, I'd say, at this point. So, the touch of Nixis is certainly welcome.
Yeah. There are two other titles I wanted to talk about here, which are arcade racers. But unfortunately, we saw very little of either. So there's Screamer, which is a very cool-looking little racer. It reminded me a bit of Need for Speed Unbounded in terms of that mix between the kind of 2D cell shading in the characters and the 3D environments. But it's very anime-inspired here. But apparently, John, it's a revival of a 90s arcade racer, which I was not aware of when I saw this trailer, but you immediately picked up on.
Yeah, and I picked up on it as a joke. I was joking, like, "Oh, is this a sequel to the 1995 PC game from Virgin?" And then I actually looked it up. I was like, "Oh, it actually is that." So I did not see that coming, and I wish it actually shown some of the game. But yeah, like Screamer was known in the PC circles back then as being like, "Oh wow, this is actually a game that can compete with what PlayStation is doing." Right, in terms of
Yeah.
visuals, and like Ridge Racer, like it's a high-end 3D polygon racing game with bright colors, and it looks and plays awesome. Not as good as Ridge Racer, but it's still quite fun. It's very, very fast. It was known for its SVGA mode, which pushed every PC to the absolute limits at the time. It got sequels. It got Screamer 2, and then there was like Screamer Rally, I think, and both of which had 3D effects support, of course. And I've always enjoyed it. It's one of the few like PC original arcade racing games from that era that I think it really holds up quite well. And I cannot even begin to understand how they managed to pull that out of nowhere and bring this franchise back. Like, what would have happened to the rights? It was a Virgin Games published title.
Yeah.
So I'm just surprised to see it come back at all. But heck yeah.
I just like the way you refer to it as a franchise.
But it is a franchise. It's got multiple games.
It's an IP, possibly. Yeah, it's an intellectual.
The Screamer cinematic universe is what you're suggesting there,
Yeah.
Rich.
Dude, it's like you don't even know. You guys haven't played these. I'm telling you.
Yeah, fair point. Yeah. Uh-huh. And there's a Sonic game. Whatever.
Yes, I know both John and I are probably interested in this one because it's another
Oh yeah.
Sonic racing title. I'm excited for this because the earlier Sonic racing games were so good, but I'm not sure if this is Sumo Digital who developed those prior games because there's no indication of developer in the press materials. And Sumo, I know, is working on a couple of games at the moment as well that are all penciled in. So I'm not sure if they'd have the capacity for this. I'd hope it would be them because they did such a terrific job on Transformed and on Team Racing. But I am hoping here, and I am glad, that it doesn't seem to be team-based because I do feel like team-based play is kind of a weird fit for a racing title. That was not my favorite spin on the concept, I'd have to say. I just hope they nail it because I think these Sonic racing titles have a very high pedigree, unlike certain other elements, perhaps, of the Sonic universe of games. These racing titles have always been consistently high quality, always been consistently really exciting and really fun to play, and just smooth and fun kart races. Probably the best kart races out there outside of Mario Kart, I'd have to say, in my personal opinion. So, yeah, I'm excited for it. I hope they nail it. Do I have a lot of confidence in it? I would if it was Sumo, but I don't know if it is Sumo, so we'll just have to see on that one.
I notice at the end there's going to be Xbox One and PS4 versions. I guess it kind of makes sense since they're doing a Switch one, but that is an outlier even for Sonic games, I think.
It is what it is, I guess. Yeah, if you are targeting Switch one, it makes more sense there as opposed to something like Elden Ring, which is just targeting an extremely vanishing share of 12-year-old consoles there. But 2025 shipping on an Xbox One, I don't think you need to do it realistically. but if they need to here, I'm not necessarily opposed to that, given that I think it probably will be one of these games that does scale pretty nicely. Especially if they're targeting the Switch as like a base platform, as Sumo did, as I recall, with Team Sonic Racing, where you get all the visual features basically of Team Sonic Racing on the Switch. If they're able to live up to anything like that pedigree here, I think it'll be a really good experience across many platforms, hopefully. But yeah, that's it. That's it for me here. I don't know if you guys have any more comments, but
I'm catching that it might actually be Sega's Hardlight Studio.
Oh, okay.
That did Sonic Dream Team, and they did the Apple Arcade version of Sonic Racing back in the day. They've done. I would say these guys have done some good work.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Sonic Dream Team was like shockingly good as an Apple Arcade game. I did play that with a controller, and it's quite excellent. But Sumo Digital still the GOAT when it comes to this kind of stuff. So we'll see if they can actually match that.
Okay, good stuff. Okay, let's move on from the Game Awards towards just a bit of extra content that we had to cover. Obviously, a couple of weeks back, we looked at Avatar Frontiers of Pandora on PlayStation 5 Professional and were not particularly happy with the results because the PSSR implementation, arguably worse in quality terms than the existing FSR2 version on the base machine. Pro machine shouldn't be worse than the base machine in any sort of metric. It looks like Ubisoft Massive has reacted to the criticism. There are patches for both Avatar Frontiers of Pandora and Star Wars Outlaws, which also had some pretty profound PSSR issues. And Oliver, you took a look at them for us, and it's quite an interesting solution they've come up with, right?
Yes, it is interesting. I'll start here with Avatar, because that game I think is maybe more pressing in terms of some of the issues that were introduced. But they've essentially added 4 discrete modes here. A quality mode at 30 FPS, a quality mode at 60 FPS, a performance mode, and a quality mode at 40 FPS, plus a PSSR and FSR toggles. That's basically 8 full mode variations here, which is quite a few.
Wow.
But I decided here to simplify things by starting off with a performance mode and some simple PSSR and FSR comparisons, because I think that's probably the starting point for a lot of players. If they are digging through these menus, like what's the best reconstruction solution to play on PS5 Pro? So I'll spoil it. I think the answer is pretty clearly FSR for a few reasons. Number one, it doesn't exhibit the same lighting denoising issues we see with PSSR. So basically any area of the image that is lit predominantly by the RTGI in particular can look pretty ugly with PSSR. That's basically areas that are in shadow. With PSSR, those areas look very unstable looking. With FSR, it's not perfect, but it is more consistent and more stable, especially in stills. It's a pretty common fault we see with PSSR in certain games. Can also show up a little bit with the SSR, particularly at far distances, where the PSSR is giving you a more noisy, less stable SSR resolve there. The second issue I'd say is just PSSR's kind of fundamental lack of coherency, for lack of a better term. Like, it's that strange noise and softness you get across the entire image, even parts of the image where the lighting is very direct. It's really noisy, almost like there's this film grain effect that you can't turn off, but like a really kind of ugly looking film grain that's kind of warping the image underneath. FSR doesn't have this issue and looks sharper in head-to-heads. So both those issues are noticeable at rest and during movement. I don't think it's worth getting into like a point-by-point comparison here because those issues just stand out and make PSSR look pretty bad at times. FSR is just delivering a better result. There are areas where PSSR can be better, like it's sharper during movement, as we see in some other games with PSSR, but on the whole, I think FSR 3 is just better. But of course, we have those 4 visual modes on PS5 Pro here. So there are 3 quality mode variants, like I said, 30, 40, 60, and a performance mode variant, which is 60 FPS. So one difference between the quality modes seemingly universally and the performance mode is the quality mode appears to run with higher visual settings. So the foliage here draws out a little bit further across all the quality modes, for instance, even the 60 FPS quality mode, as far as I can tell. So it suggests that these are operating with the quality mode settings there. The key difference in my eyes is image quality. The quality 60 FPS and performance 60 FPS look pretty similar to me, but the quality 30 FPS mode looks a lot sharper. It's much clearer, especially when using PSSR. It exhibits those issues to a lesser degree, I would say. I did some pixel counts here, quick pixel counts, and the performance mode and quality 60 modes were hanging around 900p, 1152p, counts in that range with PSSR, while the quality 30 mode was like 1512p, 1800p, counts like that, so higher res. In that case, I also did some comparisons with the PS5 version in performance mode and the Pro version in performance mode with FSR3 for a bit of like comparisons. And in one shot that I got, it looks like the Pro is clearer, sharper, more temporally stable. Internally, the base machine in this shot is 720p and the Pro is about 936p. 720p basically being the lowest on the resolution scale that Avatar can go on PS5. Yeah. I did some other comparison shots, but Avatar has certain like fog and haze effects that got in the way, making one platform look unusually soft relative to the other. So this is the one that I got that actually looked pretty similar in both machines in terms of the atmospheric rendering. Lastly, with Avatar, oh boy, I took a look at performance. In the base game, it's kind of like 60 FPS roughly in performance mode, but it does drop some frames there periodically. And here, it's basically the same situation. I'm not sure whether that's from CPU limitations or dynamic res flow that's too aggressive, or just spikes in GPU load that the dynamic res is not 100% catching up with. The performance mode seems to run better than the quality mode at 60 FPS, which dropped more frequently in my tests. And they do have some tearing in the top portion of the screen when they drop frames, which was the same behavior we saw on PS5. The quality mode at 30 FPS, unsurprisingly, though I did test that, it does basically run at 30. So for Star Wars Outlaws, it's pretty similar in terms of the PSSR versus FSR breakdown there, which is not surprising, given that it's the same engine, same developer, less than a year apart there. It's pretty similar in a lot of respects, technology-wise, I'd have to assume. But it's also quite different in terms of the content. I think that Outlaws has, generally speaking, worse image quality than Avatar, on consoles especially. Those wide open fields of grass really aren't suited well to either technique, but in my analysis here, PSSR kind of looks worse. It looks blurry and noisy at the same time, whereas FSR just kind of looks like FSR. You get those salt and pepper artifacts, but it looks reasonably sharp and sort of clear. But the Outlaws does interestingly have some very noisy ray traced lighting, especially in small scale environments. That's a problem with FSR and PSSR, but FSR is definitely a little bit better here again. PSSR shows more obvious noise, and the lighting doesn't really cohere as well, though neither technique is really perfect. I think you need to kick things up to basically quality mode before you start to get a really stable RT lighting presentation in some of those smaller scale environments, which is a unique issue in Star Wars Outlaws, and like the cantina here, or when we're kind of going around the various markets and stalls here, it's definitely a constant problem on both machines in performance mode. And then on top of those issues, PSSR is just generally softer and less stable and noisier, regardless of what kind of content is on screen. Performance is basically the same as Avatar, as far as I can tell. One-off drop frames here and there, nothing huge. So overall here, it's good that Massive has added FSR back into the mix. But I do have to say that I'm not a big fan of the way the games are configured now, especially for new players or players who will just stick to the defaults, because there are a lot of different modes. Though I know players have different opinions on that. I'm not going to get into that here. I think probably the performance 60 FPS and quality 60 FPS modes are pretty duplicative of each other, but that's not that big of an issue. For me, the issue here is just giving players that choice between FSR and PSSR. I think FSR is clearly better, and by a good enough margin in these titles, that I don't think you want to give players that choice. I think you just want to give them FSR instead of giving them that opportunity to have a worse visual experience, in my opinion. I understand there's probably a political element to that. I also understand there's probably an element where you've given an option to players. It's kind of hard to then take it away. But I think the approach taken by Bloober with Silent Hill 2 is a bit better, where they just replaced it with their old anti-aliasing and reconstruction solution and not really thought too hard about it. I think if you are going to give players all these modes, they kind of have to represent legitimate trade-offs here. And even in a game like GT7 or Spider-Man 2, which John took a look at both those games on PS5 Pro, all those toggles kind of make sense and kind of do their own things in their own context, and maybe you would want to have certain toggles enabled or disabled. In particular, in GT7, the choice between their TAA and PSSR presents different trade-offs in terms of image quality and performance that are pretty legitimate trade-offs there, especially with the RT. But that's not the case here. So that's not going to be an issue for me or John or Rich. It might be an issue for a lot of players who just are not well-versed or have not done the research, and who probably will just stick with the defaults. I think one of the games defaulted to PSSR and the other defaulted to FSR3 upon my first boot. So it does not seem like there's too much of a rhyme or reason there necessarily, which is unfortunate. So yeah, just my thoughts on it. I'm glad they've gone back to the old AA solution potentially. Not ideal 100%, but it is definitely a big step in the right direction, at least until they do promise that they're going to be working on their PSSR implementation here, possibly. If that can be improved, obviously, that would be a nice outcome. But for now, FSR is perfectly fine, I think.
Right. So just the mode you recommend for each game, which one is it?
Probably for VSync, Performance 60. Or I shouldn't say Performance 60, it's just Performance.
Right.
to me, that's good, especially in Avatar. In Star Wars Outlaws, there's more of a trade-off where you go to like quality 30 or maybe quality 40, and you are getting a better lighting presentation, substantially better lighting presentation. That's more my concern there. If you do have a VRR display and you do have that enabled, try quality 60. It does drop a little bit more. Maybe you could notice some of the differences, but to me, the differences in terms of image settings there, in terms of visual settings, seem pretty minimal. Like, you're not going to notice a little bit of extended grass draw distance, especially with the image quality issues the game already has with distant foliage and things like that. So just my recommendation there.
Okay. Well, it's an interesting thing, right? Because obviously it's great that choice has been returned to the user and there are palpable advantages to the patch, right? But at the same time, it's kind of like a holding pattern, isn't it? It's basically, right, okay, there's an issue here. We're just going to give all of the options to you and you can basically decide what you think is best, which on the one hand is great. And I guess it works for a pro console, which would have a more enthusiast level audience, I guess. But at the same time, you kind of do want the developer to guide you towards the best solution at the very least, right? I think that's your continuing point about the proliferation of different modes in console games. Yeah. Okay. Good stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm happy. I'm happy if they want to ship different modes, especially to suit different kinds of display types and different kinds of FPS targets. I think the way they've configured these games, typically with modes, makes a lot of sense. It's just now we throw in an anti-aliasing and reconstruction solution that in my mind is clearly not up to the task of actually delivering a stable and coherent image in these games that do rely so heavily on ray trace lighting. Like, it's easy to forget, but these are games that are really heavily ray tracing their lighting for console games in particular. You kind of need the upsampler to help you there in terms of getting that image looking coherent and stable over multiple frames. That's something that PSSR at the moment is not doing. So that is really critical here, giving players the opportunity to kind of disrupt that fundamental lighting presentation with PSSR. I think it's a bad idea, personally. My own personal opinion. Yeah. I understand there are factors here, but I think they should remove it.
Yeah, there is kind of like a three horsemen of the apocalypse when it comes to PSSR, which is like foliage, ray tracing, and low resolution. And those three horsemen are all present and correct in these two games. And lo and behold, it's not producing great results. But, you know, at least there is now a mitigation in place, which I think is probably the best way forward in the short term. Okay, let's move on. Final news topic of the week that we're going to discuss, and I guess it's games adjacent, but it's certainly something that's slightly concerning. LG has discontinued production of all of its Blu-ray players, and this follows in the wake of other people like Samsung, for example, also dropping support for the Blu-ray format. John, you read this news with some level of concern, and I guess it is games adjacent, bearing in mind that the only real way to preserve games on the console space fully and completely is via Blu-ray discs right now. And, you know, the fewer, the lower the demand for Blu-ray disc players in general, the fewer of them will be made, which may well have a bearing on whether there will be a physical disc option available on next generation consoles.
Yeah, it's just the general state of physical discs, Blu-ray discs. It's a bit concerning given this. So, first of all, no actual new players had been produced by LG since like 6 years ago or something. So they've been selling older models and nobody's really taken the step to develop new ones. And now, along with Samsung and Oppo, they're also opting out now, and they're done making them. So that just leaves companies like Panasonic and Sony and a few others still out there releasing these. And they also haven't updated their lineup in a long time. But the thing about this is concerning because then this also incentivizes studios to not bother with Blu-ray releases, which I know streaming is quote unquote good enough in many cases. It does look fine by and large, but you still get better picture and certainly audio from a disc. And for movies that you really care about, it's nice to be able to have that option. I think it should remain an option, but it's becoming difficult. There's like when you go shopping at a store, especially in like America now, Like you just barely can find these things anywhere. It's you're relying on online ordering. Even then, they're often sold out. It's a little better over here in Europe, but still, it's not as good as it should be. Furthermore, a lot of the cheaper UHD players just have issues. I've talked to so many people that they've actually struggled to get through certain movies. They just don't play right. And it's absolutely insane that this plagues players at all like this. I've not had that issue, but I also have an extremely expensive UHD Blu-ray player that does actually work very well, but one should not have to go to that level to get good playback.
Well, what is the model?
It's the Panasonic UB9000. So, which is a really solid player. I'm really happy with it. I've been using it for years. The ones that I've heard a lot of the Sony players have issues with, like movies struggling to even finish, which is not good.
Wow.
That's not good at all.
What about the PS5? Because obviously that's
PS5 actually does okay, and the Xbox Series X also pretty okay, other than the software side being a little bit finicky. Like I've had issues with them on Xbox. It's done some weird stuff with the software, but when the software is working, it plays fine. Basically, it's harder to play these discs than it should be, and it's also harder to find them than it should be. And as a result, it really feels like everyone's just sort of shrugging and being like, yep, streaming. But the problem with that, of course, is that with the full control over where the movie appears, it's very easy for films to just disappear. And you're like, where can I watch this? Oh, it's nowhere. Like there's no official way to buy this or watch this or do anything with this at all. They can just decide to pull it back and it's done. And that sucks, which has actually in turn brought back things like piracy, where you kind of have to rely on piracy now to obtain certain movies because they just lock you out of the ability to get them, which is nuts.
It's outrageous.
Discs basically provided a way around that. And if they're becoming less popular and slowly drying up and nobody's making new players, and part of the problem with the UHD players I've always had is that the cost of the players was too high. And as I noted, a lot of the lower end models, which should be adequate, by the way, they're not. They have problems. And I think that's just nonsense. So like the ball was fumbled badly and nobody made a course correction on it. And this is where we're at now. And that really sucks. And game consoles are kind of the easiest way, I guess, for this to work now, because if you have a disc-based console, you can still play these things. Heck, probably the cheapest way to get into UHD Blu-ray is to go hunt down like an Xbox One S or something, right?
Right. Yes.
It does do it. It plays fine. That option is there. But yeah, the thing about UHD...
scaling back of hardware basically does mean inevitably there'll be a scaling back of software. That's, unless it is the case that the PlayStation 5 basically becomes the default player effectively. But yes, fewer options on the hardware side will inevitably send the message to manufacturers that there isn't a market there. That's deeply concerning.
Exactly. That's concerning. And I feel like the format was really good. I love UHD Blu-rays. The quality is awesome. And for the first time in a disc medium, they're region free. You can use them from any country, anywhere. That's amazing. Blu-ray region codes suck, dude. It's such a pain in the butt on those. And DVDs had it as well, but it was easy enough to defeat, thankfully. So I don't know. I'm just bummed out in the direction we're going. And I know a lot of people are like, yeah, well, you get with the future, buddy. But like I said, companies then gain full control and they control what you're allowed to watch and when you can watch it. And sometimes those things just disappear. It's good to have options, and we're losing them.
There's something quite different there versus gaming, right? Which is the complete removal of access to particular content. And it's not, it just doesn't really make sense to me. I mean, let's face facts. In the here and now, so to speak, if you want to play a particular game on a PlayStation or an Xbox, that game is available to buy digitally, right? I mean, you might be ripped off compared to a disc version, as we've discussed at length in the past. But the point is, you have access to the content. It is there. If they're actually withdrawing Blu-ray movies, or rather withdrawing the streaming versions of these movies, and there are certain movies that you can't access anymore, absolutely that's a problem. And if they're going to be withdrawing the option to physically own a copy of the content, that's a problem. And you're quite right. The inevitable consequence of it is going to be a return to piracy. It's that simple.
It's that simple.
In terms of the implications for gaming, obviously, well, we've seen with the launch of the PlayStation 5 Professional that, in a best case scenario, we're looking at an optical drive as an optional extra, a situation that's likely going to persist into the next generation based on that, which is not great. I guess the one thing to point out is that, well, Sony make their own drives, don't they? They make their own optical drives. So, the concept of LG and Oppo and Samsung withdrawing from the market doesn't really have a bearing on whether there will be an optical drive for, say, PlayStation 6. It's whether Sony wants to do it, which I think is slightly concerning at this point. Any thoughts on this, Oliver?
Yeah, I think it's not a great sign about the sign of the times there, but really, when you think about it, games are kind of the last bastion for ownership-based models in media, period, and certainly physical media ownership in general, I think. That's reflected in this news. As long as Sony makes the drives, they can continue to supply them, for sure. But I'd be curious to see what that actually would look like for PS6. Like, I could see them continuing to ship some kind of disk drive option. For older games, I'd be surprised to see PS6 games on a disc, personally. I think that's probably unlikely. For Microsoft, I think that it's just completely dead in terms of physical distribution. I think they have no interest in it. Nintendo, though, it's kind of interesting here. It's a separate kind of question there, but I'm curious to see what that looks like, if there's an install process for the carts. We know they're using carts again. I am worried that we're going to see a lot of games using digital downloads there, using the carts as kind of a verification check, a validation check. Because I like, when I don't, I'll admit my software library on current-gen consoles and Switch is almost entirely digital. But when I have bought games physically for Switch in particular, I've liked it because it's a little cart. It can hold all the game on it. If I really like a game, I might get the cart for it, get the box, get that nice little collector thing going on there. Like for the recent Ace Attorney trilogy, I bought that on cart there. And I get all the game and I can plug it into any Switch console and I know it will run immediately. There's like a certain immediacy to that you lost even with PlayStation 4 and Xbox One with the discs. Yep. And now it seems like you're going to be losing all that entirely. So I just hope that as Nintendo continues to support physical media, they support it hopefully, and developers continue to support it hopefully in the way that we'd like to see, which is games on cart, being able to play them immediately, that kind of stuff. I mean, Nintendo's cart pricing makes that maybe challenging for some games, unfortunately, possibly, but I hope that continues to be mostly the case, at least.
If I had to make a prophecy, I will say that games obviously will persist on physical media on Nintendo Switch 2, and I think that you'll be able to run the game from the cartridge as opposed to it installing onto the internal media, because I just don't think that kind of model works for Nintendo. They're kind of wedded to the console experience, which is as close to plug and play as you're going to get these days. And also, if there's only like the mooted 256 gigs of memory on Switch 2, that could fill up very, very quickly, and again would be detrimental to the gameplay experience if you're always having to shuffle games on and off, especially if you own the cartridge. That would be kind of nuts. Don't know what you think about that, John, but I just think Nintendo would, thankfully, are quite traditionalist in this sort of thing.
I mean, yeah, that's one of the reasons I like Nintendo these days a lot. Right. So they, them being out of date is actually beneficial for me. They suck it online and they love physical media.
I think there's a lot of different dimensions to this, which is that they do have a younger audience, and the physical media is declining at a much slower rate on Nintendo Switch than it is on the other platforms, and I think they're going to want to continue to service that audience. Also, the concept of kids swapping games, that's kind of something that's disappeared from like the PlayStation and Xbox, but Switch, I can still see that as a viable scenario that would be one of the reasons why you'd buy a game.
Plus, like, people still go to stores, right? Like, maybe there's less of this stuff around than there used to be in some countries, but like having a shelf presence is not something you should underestimate. And when you walk into stores, Nintendo still has a huge shelf presence. You feel it. You feel the Switch there. You see that red banner. You see all those games. It sits in your mind, even if you don't buy it that time. I feel like this is the year where Xbox basically vanished from stores. Like, it's all but gone. And like, to the average game player that just walks in that doesn't really track the industry, the Xbox may as well not even exist anymore as it's presented in these stores. I don't think that's a good thing. I don't think it's going to destroy their business or anything, mind you, but it definitely has an impact on the mind share. And I think Nintendo will continue to take advantage of it. And it varies per region, of course. In America, this stuff is becoming even more like scant at this point. There's less of it around. But then in Europe, there's still a decent amount of store presence for games. And in Japan, there's a ton. Like, it's huge. Like, people buy a lot of stuff on physical media. Like, when Dragon Quest 3, the remake, shipped, they actually like ran out of copies to sell. Like, they sold through the initial, batch of games that they produced. They could have sold more for sure. Yeah. It's still traditional in that way. So yeah, digital's big, but there's still a market for physical games. And I think Nintendo is smart to leverage that. And that's going to continue to be a point of success for them.
Okay, so that's the end of the news. So let's move on to Supporter Q&A, which is, as always, the part of the show where every week we field questions from our supporters on the DF Supporter Program via Patreon. So many questions this week and not enough time to answer them all, but we're going to kick off with this one. Actually, it's two questions, both relating to Indiana Jones. Let's kick off with this one from 8-Bit Voxel. Hi, DF crew. With Indiana Jones and the Great Circle having implemented path tracing on PC while running on a branch of id Tech 7 motor, are you confident the same treatment could be coming for Doom Dark Ages, possibly with an official id Tech 8? Your thoughts on some additional RT enhancements we could see, or what could push the envelope even further, in your opinion? Alex? Well, Alex isn't here, but don't worry, we've got opinions. We've also got this question from Peter. Indiana Jones reminded me how brilliant id Tech is. It can clearly manage wide open spaces, has great scalability, and can support advanced ray tracing features. I'd love to see Microsoft/Bethesda license the engine and thus see more devs use it as an alternative to Unreal Engine. What are your thoughts on this? And indeed, do you think it's even viable? Interesting questions. John, let's tackle the first one about path tracing on Doom the Dark Ages. I think from my perspective, the question is, they're two very different games, right?
Yeah.
The thing about path tracing is the kind of temporal stability. You've got to have like really fast response on stuff like RTGI. And if you're in a sort of Twitch shooter like Doom, I'd worry it just wouldn't update quickly enough. What do you think?
I mean, I think there's certainly potential for them to implement it, but I'm with you on the concerns. And I don't know, but I feel like Doom Dark Ages could very possibly have the non-path traced ray trace lighting that we're seeing in Indiana Jones, given how fast it runs, right? It's really fast, which is very much in line with what they would want to deliver for Doom the Dark Ages, right? Because it needs to be fast for that game. So I feel like that's what we're getting a look at here. But additional RT enhancements, that's tricky. I'm really not confident that we would necessarily see that, because even though they are ultimately, they're both sharing some similar tech, they also kind of branch out and do their own thing. And Indiana Jones has it's a very different style of game with like a different purpose behind everything in it. And I could see them going for things that maybe id Software is like, no, this doesn't fit with what we're doing with Doom. Like, for instance, I'm not even sure Indiana Jones uses the standard TAA solution that was developed for Doom Eternal, I guess, and before that, Doom 2016, sort of based on that. Like, could we see something different in actual Doom Dark Ages? I
Well,
think
RT Reflections, surely that wasn't in Indiana Jones, was it?
Nope, they replaced that with RTGI instead. But Dark Ages is also a game based on what we've seen from the trailer that's set in more like sort of like rough environments,
Right.
where diffuse GI makes a lot of sense. Whereas Doom Eternal had a lot of shiny areas where like strong specular reflections would be welcome. So given that the shift in theme and the tone of the levels, I feel like RTGI probably makes more sense there, but maybe on PC they'll allow both. I don't know. Or, you know, a more advanced RTGI or something that's specifically on PC. There's just a lot of questions still that we just don't know.
Oliver, any thoughts?
I would expect they would probably ship the RTGI on consoles there, but skip the other ray tracing. That could potentially be the case. Or it could be the case they ship something like RT Reflections, but I would agree with John there that the need for diffuse GI coverage is probably more important and more integral to actually developing that game and making it look good across platforms without spending a ton of time baking out all that lighting. For the third-party question, I mean, I agree it sounds nice, but to make an engine adaptable for third parties, you might end up making the engine worse for your own purposes. And you can notice that even to do indie machine games basically forked id Tech there. So even for their uses, it was apparently enough of a need there to actually make that engine work for themselves and not just rely on that main branch. Unreal is Unreal for a reason, and it's flexible for a reason, and it also has certain issues for potentially similar reasons. It's not going to work for every single game and every single developer in every single circumstance to have the same approach with their game engine. So I would just suggest possibly some caution there. We've seen problems certainly with many engines when developers have tried to extend, like Frostbite, for instance, to many different kinds of games. So it might not be the right solution.
And even id Tech. The first Evil Within wasn't exactly a tech powerhouse.
Well, that was all forked from the id Tech 5, like the Rage era of id Tech, which was kind of like a dead end. Well, I mean, technically virtualized textures and all that, the texture atlas idea, that did pan out, but what the choices they made at the time for that specific revision of id Tech made it not great in a lot of ways, because it was 100% static baked lighting everywhere. And if Evil Within, they kind of had to retrofit their own like dynamic lighting system in, and I think that kind of probably is the reason it runs as it does.
Yeah, I think we're talking about two very different use cases here. Unreal Engine is built from the ground up to be a middleware for developers, and it's designed to be accessible. It's kind of like the engine for everyone, if you like, whereas id Tech is designed for id, for id and its affiliate studios. The vast majority, if not all of which, are actually technologically really, really competent and they know what they're doing.
And I think id just doesn't want to support it, right? Like that's
the whole concept of support. The ability to turn an engine that's really good at certain things into an engine that's good / competent at everything is like a gigantic undertaking that I just don't think id Software have got any particular interest in doing. And it's quite interesting when you actually saw, there is the Starfield example, of course, where there's the story of id going in to help optimize the game. What they didn't do is say, okay, let's bring across all of this stuff from id Tech. That's just not what they did. They just basically went in there, found the areas where they thought they could add some optimizations and did so. And with relatively good results, I'd say. But they certainly didn't import, id Tech. That's just different engines, different use cases, different outcomes, really. Let's move on to this question from Dajarko. His usual introduction here. Happy half fortnight, lads! ! Has anyone else noticed the strange conspicuous absence, the invisible elephant in the room, the empty space of the endless void? Of course, I'm talking about the lack of a Cyberpunk PS5 Pro patch! ! They've come out and said it's not happening, but they've broken their word many, many times before. Can we all agree that they should break their word again in the name of redemption, if nothing else? Exclamation point. They could, at the very least, there's some block capitals there, raise or unlock the frame rate cap on the ray tracing mode. How would you all like to see Cyberpunk patched on the Pro? Shout it loudly, just in case it makes it more likely. Oliver, thoughts?
Given the track record of games shipping on the Pro, I would be less confident in that and less excited for that. Possibly something like unlocking that ray tracing mode. That could be something they do. But beyond that, any kind of fundamental changes there, I think are a little bit tougher. Because I don't think there's a great path for them to enhance image quality at the moment, beyond just using the PS5 Pro's bigger GPU to enhance DRS. But I believe that's the DRS behavior on Cyberpunk on PS5 Pro is currently already pretty good. Like, it does be hitting higher resolutions.
Yeah, you don't need a patch for that.
You don't need a patch for that, exactly. And then the other problem is that on older SDKs, I believe developers don't have access to certain ray tracing optimizations or hardware that we are not yet currently aware of, but may happen to be in the PS5 Pro. I think we know that from various leaks. So they may not be able to push out RT to the levels that you'd like without updating to SDK 9 or 10 or something, and that would present its own potential issues. So ultimately, I think that like the version of Cyberpunk that you have today on PS5 Pro is probably a pretty good version of Cyberpunk for that hardware. Not sure it makes a lot of sense for them to go in and add in PSSR when the results might be similar or worse than the FSR they have there, and where they're not really necessarily able to take advantage of that additional ray tracing hardware potentially to implement more ray traced effects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm agreed with you there. Absolutely. I think they could, at a push, maybe revitalize and revamp the ray tracing mode to do more than just shadows, because that's quite a limited implementation of the various technologies they do have available to them. And it would be nice to see reflections. It would be nice to see GI. It would be nice to see a whole bunch of stuff, but it would require a good degree of engineering effort and, as you likely say, an SDK shift. On the performance mode side, it's already in a pretty good state in terms of hitting 60 frames per second. The limit is actually the CPU there, from what I've managed to see. And there is a modest boost from the existing version of the game, just running under Game Boost. So, what more do you want? Extra additional settings? Yes, you'd get them, but then you'd lose the DRS boost that you'd get just from, the standard Pro code. Sorry, the standard PS5 Pro running, standard base PS5 code running on the Pro. So I think, it's in a pretty good state as it is. It would be, it's a nice to have, isn't it, John? It's not a essential, really.
Yeah. And I think they're pretty limited in what they can do, like Oliver's saying, with the SDK stuff. So I think, as Dejako suggests, just removing the frame rate cap from the RT mode, or like unifying performance and quality to be one mode, is probably the best you could hope for.
And on the ray tracing mode,
I guess.
Well, the ray tracing mode can actually dip beneath 30 on a base PlayStation 5. It's limited, but it can happen, which raises the question of just how much headroom is actually available if
That's
you
a good
remove
point.
the cap. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. But let's move on. Okay, so this week there was the launch of the Intel Arc B580, $250 for a 12 gigabyte mainstream GPU that actually has pretty reasonable performance. People are calling it a disruptor, but it's actually just, the kind of product that should have been there years ago, to be honest, in what is a very moribund area of the GPU market. This question question generated by Jensen GPT. The Arc B580 is looking mighty impressive for the price. Great overall performance, good VRAM amount, but I'm concerned about its viability in the current market. The B580's die size is 272mm square. For comparison's sake, the 4070 Ti's die size is 294mm square. Intel is selling a GPU with a die almost as big as a 4070 Ti, but with performance closer to a 4060 Ti. Well, it's actually closer to a 4060 in some scenarios, on a more expensive node. for only $250. This means Intel is either making very little money on the B580 or possibly even losing money on every unit sold. If this is the case, then they likely aren't going to make many of them, meaning it won't actually push AMD and Nvidia to lower their prices. It also means Intel won't be gaining money to put towards R&D costs for future GPUs. Are my concerns unfounded here? I don't think they're unfounded. I think they're actually, the maths speak for themselves. You've got this massive die on a $250 GPU. It's TSMC 5 nanometer, which is not inexpensive, let's say. And, you are looking at a build cost for a GPU, whereas, it's up there with like 4070, which is, twice the price, really. From Nvidia. So I do think that they are probably selling at cost and possibly losing money per unit sold, which is quite a stark thing to say. However, what more could Intel have done if the actual performance of the product is more like a 4060 to a 4060 Ti than a 4070? You can't charge 4070 prices if your performance isn't there. So instead, they've done everything they could to make a splash, to generate some kind of shift away from Nvidia by offering value across the board that's better. I don't think they could have done anything better, and I wouldn't be too worried about the amount of money that Intel is or maybe isn't losing per unit, because we don't even know how many they're making at this point. Maybe it's not that many, but certainly the goodwill generated for the brand is priceless. I won't say there's hype, but there's generally positive feelings about Intel GPUs now in the wake of the B580 and the B570. As I said in the B580 review, based on the haircut to specs there, I reckon it's going to be really, really good. I reckon it's going to be a fantastic product for $220, where at the moment there isn't really any kind of product for $220 that's really great. You've got like the Radeon 6600, which is often sub 200, but it's a good chunk slower than all of these offerings. So I think it's all they could have done. I don't think if they're losing money, it's all factored into the plan, the long-term plan. And what they need to do is they need to build up the brand. They need to build up their credibility. They need to basically make people at least think twice before they just go out and buy an Nvidia card. And I think that's exactly what this does. Oliver, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything Rich has said so far. The die size is concerning. That doesn't matter as much for cut price desktop cards that probably have some power headroom on a typical PC, but it would matter for anything higher end. It would matter for potentially portable designs that might go into laptops. But for Intel, they don't have an alternative here, I don't think, if they want to play the long game, as they seem reasonably committed to doing. I guess we'll see if there is a third or fourth Arc generation, but I imagine those are currently planned. They have to keep prices low to build up market share and mind share, and to give their driver team something to work with to hopefully get those drivers in a really, really good state. And then hope that subsequent chips are good enough to maintain competitive pricing without excessive costs. The designs do have to get more die efficient, though. I think that matters a lot for all kinds of designs, and for profitability and margins and getting the chips to a level where you can actually sell them and make a decent profit off of it. I think it does matter enormously. So it's a challenge for them, but ultimately for the consumer, you're still getting a card that doesn't have like ridiculous power consumption. $250 or $220 for performance that you're not going to get out of any other vendor. So it's still a good deal for consumers. I think that's what Intel is trying to do, present a good deal for consumers. And that's kind of what I think maybe matters with these products, at least in the short term.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, John?
And not too much to add there, just that it's really cool to have an actual affordable GPU like this that's punching above its weight in terms of the price class, which I feel like we've been slowly but surely getting away from, right? You look at the last 10 years of GPUs, the prices are kind of out of control these days. There's great GPUs being made, but it costs a lot. This is obviously more of a budget line sort of focused card, but it performs really darn well considering. And I feel like maybe this is their play to sort of tap into that market that just they want to have a PC that can play games decently, but don't want to spend the usual GPU prices. And by erasing problems like the low VRAM from the budget line, it really helps with sort of ensuring that it can actually play games, even if it's not at the best settings. You're not having those VRAM problems, which plague all those 8 GB GPUs. My goodness.
Yeah. Well, yeah, certainly the arrival of Indiana Jones has certainly put the cat amongst the pigeons there, because, you're having to, the compromises you need to make. Alex did a pretty good job in his video of highlighting that, the compromises are okay. They're not, game breaking by any stretch. There was a great deal of misunderstanding about what the texture cache actually is on an id engine game, but at the same time, the concepts that you're having to reduce hair, you're having to reduce the shadow quality, and it's not down to the computational prowess of the GPU. It's the fact that it's just not got enough memory. That's an issue. And also the fact that Nvidia, the latest rumors are saying that for 5060 is going to be an 8 GB card. That is problematic. And if we've got products like this coming out, which are basically saying, it's okay, we've got that taken care of, then I think that's great for competition. It might cause a rethink, which I think is certainly a long time coming, for sure. Let's move on to the next question. This question from Gorguts is also related to the recent Intel Arc GPU launch. Hi DF crew, ! Based on how the B580 performs, how would a hypothetical B770 perform based on rumored specs, and what would it need to succeed? Yeah, that's an interesting point, because the concept of a 580 does suggest there will be a 770, just as there was with the first generation Arc. And I would suggest that you will be looking, based on projections from B580, that you're looking at a product that would vary between 4060 Ti to 4070 Ti performance, which is a wide band. But that is kind of slightly strange about B580, is that the performance you get out of it seems to vary quite dramatically. It's much more inconsistent versus AMD versus NVIDIA. And also when you're looking at power consumption, I mean, the B580 is like 190 watt TDP. It doesn't ever seem to hit 190 watts based on the titles I did look at. And it can go like as low as 140 watts in Alan Wake 2. Kind of suggests that there's a utilization issue with the amount of silicon they've got. And so in terms of what a B770 is going to do, I'd expect it to be exactly like B580, but scaled up into the next GPU class. So you're going to be looking at a product that will have a wildly variable level of performance. And with that in mind, I strongly suspect that Intel will need to adopt the same strategy that they did with B580, which is to say, let's take a look at where our average performance lies and then try to outclass the competition with attractive price points, which I think is probably the best way forward. But it does seem to be the case that whether this underutilization issue is down to the drivers or whether it's just down to architecture, it just highlights to me that this is a long journey that Intel is on, and they need to kind of invest for the long term here. And I think they will. Obviously, some journalist was saying that we wouldn't even get a second generation Arc product. Well, here it is, and we did get it. And I suspect we'll get third and fourth as well, simply because if you look at the technology investments that Intel needs to make to seize market share from NVIDIA, not necessarily in the games market, but in the enterprise business, they've got to be doubling down on GPU, even if they're taking these big hits to the bottom line in the short term. Longer term, it's going to need to pay off. You're all in on AI, Oliver. That's surely the more overarching strategy here, right?
Yes, if they can foresee any path to start to claw into server market share, whether that's in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, I think you got to invest all in on graphics. I mean, Intel's in kind of a dire state. I think that's like one potential lifeline out of this is to be there, and it matters for it matters for everything. It matters for every processor with an integrated GPU that you ship, that you have high quality graphics there. So I think it's a huge mistake, I think, for them to have canceled Larrabee and other similar projects. And they should have continued to develop GPUs back then. Maybe not Larrabee specifically, because Larrabee had some interesting architectural quirks, but certainly they should have continued a GPU project past like 2009 or whenever they canceled Larrabee. But yeah, on the B770 question, I do think one possible concern here is that if you scale up that chip, continue to scale it up, power consumption starts to matter a little bit more, I'd worry, and you're running into some efficiency questions, especially with players who might live in the EU, where electricity is quite a bit more expensive than it tends to be here in North America. So I'd worry about some of those questions, because I do think that starts to matter a little bit more when you start to push a little bit more on price and you're entering a more premium segment of the market. Yeah, but in general, it just should be a bigger B580, I'd imagine, in general.
Yeah, I guess my concern would be that the inconsistency in performance that we see with B580, if it's a scalability issue, then that inconsistency could actually be wider on a bigger chip with more Xe cores. I'm really going to be interested to see whether the B570, if and when it appears, how they choose to pitch it, and how they choose to price it. But John, I mean, this other part of the question that from Gorguts here, what would it need to succeed? Well, you're basically an NVIDIA guy in terms of graphics, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing with Arc that's going to make you change your mind, really, a bigger Arc.
Absolutely not. And it's just down to the type of product that I would want isn't the type of product that they should probably make, which is the Halo high-end product. Yeah. Like We're in a different category though, right? Like we are these kind of tech nerds that are striving for the best, and NVIDIA can deliver that. And they're the only ones that can do it right now, it seems.
Well, yes.
But the areas where NVIDIA struggle, that's exactly where I think Intel needs to be targeting. I think that's what they're trying to do. NVIDIA has been struggling with the lower end cards. GPUs are expensive, like I said, and obviously, as you're noting, like the VRAM thing is a serious issue. If they're still going to launch an 8 GB card, that sucks, right? Like, so I think actually Intel is on the right track here. AMD they haven't been targeting the ultra high end, but they're still generally targeting high enough end that the prices are pretty high. In the low end parts from NVIDIA and AMD are less exciting, but I really think that Intel's striking, and they're really trying to come in to fill a spot in the market that I don't think has been well served. And so that is kind of what they need to do. But like, I would love to see a high-end GPU from Intel eventually. It's just going to take time before that's a tough kind of product to make. I do think it's still interesting in that those Halo products do sort of set the tone for the brand, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I think it would eventually behoove them to maybe have something like that if they can keep keep the gas in the tank, keep this whole train rolling smoothly, from the gaming side, at least. As far as everything else, the servers, that's a whole different market, as you guys touched on, but I don't know. Either way, I do want them to find success here, and I really hope they get there.
I would say, just as one final addendum here, because I forgot to mention it earlier when Rich asked me, but the machine learning performance of the Arc B580 is actually very impressive. When you look across benchmarks, for Stable Diffusion, for ML Perf, for all kinds of machine learning tests, it is just beating the crap out of comparable GPUs, like often really clowning on the older Arc cards, beating RTX 4060 by huge margins, like up to a 2 times margin some tests. So the fact is, like, it is a really good machine learning architecture, it seems like to me. So possibly that's the direction Intel is heading. I'm only speculating here, but get your foot in the door with the gaming cards, establish a good base of support there, and then possibly build out these really big server GPUs in the future. Maybe they're not the most efficient GPUs for gaming, but maybe they could be appropriate for the server at some point in the future, because they are seeming to really push machine learning performance in these GPUs.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's move on to the final question of the show. This one from Bjork Tribe. I know I'm not the only one here that hears the quote-unquote best performance category and first thinks of the technical performance of the game engine rather than a human's performance of a game character. Renaming the category, if Geoff was knocking on your door to award best technical game engine utilization, which game would win the bespoke trophy? Possibly encroaching slightly on our best graphics of the year video that we're planning at the moment. But it's an interesting question, right, John?
Yeah, that's why I'm going retro, baby. I'm going with the Criterion Games use of renderware and making Burnout Revenge sing on the PlayStation 2. All those lighting effects, the 60 FPS, the post-processing motion blur, like the bloom, the speed, all at 60 FPS, 480p, 16:9. It's a masterpiece. When you look at other renderware games from that, yes, I know Criterion renderware, it's one and the same, but like, come on. They absolutely blew the doors off of every single other retro or every other renderware game that entire generation. So without spoiling the 2024 pick, I had to go all the way back to 2005, I guess. So bam, there it is.
Well, in fairness, best graphics doesn't necessarily mean quote unquote
That's
best
true.
performance, as Bjork Tribe is suggesting here. What do you think, Oliver? Any particular highlights from you?
Oh, I have a good one. I think that's contemporary from this year, and I don't think this is necessarily spoiling our best graphics #1 pick or anything. But I think Tiny Glade is incredible. What they're doing with such a lightweight engine, ray traced lighting that can run on very old GPUs, even integrated graphics, very performant levels of performance there, a sub 2 gigabyte install size. And all the lighting looks really, really high quality, and it runs on, just runs on absolutely anything from your Potato to your 4090. It will run in it and it will look good. It's only on PC at the moment. I'd love to see it on consoles. I've played a little bit of it on PC. It doesn't have controller support, but if they added controller support, if they ported it to consoles, that'd be fantastic. I think it'd be even probably a good fit for something like a Switch 2 potentially. But yeah, to me, that's like #1 with a bullet this year because it is so tiny, as the name implies. It runs on everything, looks beautiful on everything, and it's just such a fantastic little game.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Okay. Well, that was the final question, therefore the end of the show. So please do like, subscribe, share. On the off chance that you did enjoy it, ring bells for notifications, which is an appeal to actually just help us with our algorithmic stuff on YouTube. DF supporter program. Join us. Enjoy early access to DF Direct Weekly each and every week. Early access to various content, in actual fact. Update from the team every week, and a whole lot more, including high quality video downloads of everything we do and have done since late 2016. But that's all from us on this one. Thanks for watching and supporting Digital Foundry, and we'll see you next week.